Hello, my name is Ian Watson. I am currently a Director Emeritus of the American Membrane Technology Association, or AMTA. The interview you're about to see is the 33rd in a series of what we call Chats with the Pioneers. AMTA is a technical association founded on the advocacy of membrane technology for water treatment, from wastewater reuse, reclamation and reuse, to seawater desalination. The heart of this technology is the membrane itself. About 3.5 years ago, the Board of Directors decided that to preserve the history of membrane and membrane system development, the association should make an effort to record these chats with those responsible for launching what is now a technology in common use throughout the world. AMTA's intent is to make segments of these chats available on its website, so that a new generation of engineers and scientists can understand the efforts of these pioneers to help solve some of the water issues facing the world today. With me for this segment, I have, starting from my immediate left, Mr. John Buonassisi. In the center, Mr. Jimmy Harn, and at the end, to my far left, Mr. Austin McCormack. And Austin, I'll start with you if you'd like to give us a little bit of your history, education, early days of work, and up to the present day.
Fine, thank you. I appreciate you suggesting fathers, because my father was important in my life. He was a construction gentleman, and he worked in power plants. So on Saturday afternoon, I would frequently find myself in some power plant somewhere. So I got a feeling of energy and engineering and all that stuff from him. And then I went on to score very high in my entrance exam for Stevens. And I got a partial scholarship for my math, which was very high, apparently. I didn't understand that at all. So I went to Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, and had a good career there. I was very fast, which never meant anything to anybody. But I scored high, and I got into Annapolis. Only 3 people from Stevens were accepted in the Annapolis exam. The number 1 guy, the number 2 guy, and the number 25 guy. That was me. And so that was a tough career. It was highly structured. And I graduated from there in 1945 and was assigned to the CL-86, a Vicksburg light cruiser, and I became the assistant engineering officer. So I was in charge of the aft boiler room and turbine room, and that was quite a chore. I had 80 people working for me, and it all worked out very well. I was amazed that I could answer all their questions, but I had such a background that I was able to do that. And that's where I learned boiler water chemistry. We did a lot of testing in our boiler, and we made a lot of power. I guess, I don't remember the number, but it was a bunch of kilowatts. And I had one shaft that I had to keep going at the same speed that my boss had his shaft going. So that was quite a chore, and we did a lot of, I remember testing that shaft for temperature. And then after the war, I went to work for a permuted company. And I had a great career there. They really needed fresh engineering talent. And I was able, in the first year, to redesign their entire clarifier system. They had been making fat, short clarifiers, and I showed them that if they made them long and skinny, that it would be less expensive. So they redesigned the whole clarifier system based on my input. Now, it turned out very importantly for my career that the clarifiers were mentioned because they removed all the stuff in the water that would prevent demineralizers from becoming ultra-pure water demineralizers. So I didn't have any idea that that's what they were doing, but it turned out that way. And the first job, of course, was Eastman Kodak, because the radioactivity was in Lake Ontario, and that radioactivity made little lines on all their film. So they stopped production. They couldn't produce anything because everything was screwed up. We had a test unit there that showed them that we could take that radioactivity particle, which was very, very fine, nano size, I think, and grow the particle big enough so it could be removed by filters. And that was very important because I sold about 180 million gallons a day worth of Spalding precipitators. And they became a very important device for me in my career. And then in 1956, I sold a Spalding precipitator to Sylvania, which had a plant up in New England which would not produce ultra-pure water. And I happened to call on the guy, and he told me he had just put in this brand new plant made by a competitor, Illinois Water Treatment, I think. And it did not make good water. So I looked at what he had. He had everything in line perfectly, but he didn't have a clarifier. So I sold him a clarifier. And it worked like a charm. He called me up. He said, it's working, it's working, it's working. He was wildly excited about it. And so that was my first entrance into specificity, you know, what are we taking out of the water? And that was 56. So I think around 57 or 8, Jack Kilby invented semiconductors. And semiconductors require ultra-pure water for every damn semiconductor you make. That's an astounding statement, but that's true. And I sold a lot of precipitators until a reverse osmosis came along in 1969. They had made the announcement to the entire world that they were going to have a startup meeting in San Diego. So I sent my chief engineer, Gene Turner, who turned out to be a very, very fine engineer in the business. And he went to there and came home very excited about reverse osmosis. He wasn't excited as Ed Reese was. Ed Reese had heard the first announcement from San Diego, and he called me up one Sunday afternoon and said, we've been replaced, Austin. They don't need us anymore. Something's been invented that does everything. So that was my beginning with reverse osmosis. You've been replaced. I didn't feel very good.
Yeah.
So anyway, the upshot of that meeting was that we had a test system. Texas Instruments really needed reverse osmosis. And so Ed Reese immediately jumped on that. So he was one of the first guys that was a convert. And so he smartly had DuPont provide a pilot plant and Roger provide a pilot plant. It's a 10 or 20 gallon a minute system. And so we had both of those running for about 3 months. And everybody there proved that Roger was superior to DuPont. DuPont would not clean up well. And every time you cleaned DuPont up, it stored some of its dirt for later on. But Roga did not. Roga had a better flow pattern, straight through, whereas DuPont went and then turned around and had to get all the waste stuff out by going backwards. It didn't all come out. So we put in a 140-gallon-minute reverse osmosis plant for TI, and they loved it, and it worked beautifully, and it's probably still working. So it was a fantastic early acceptance of all new technology. It came along right in the middle of my career. I'd started my career in 1946 and ended in 1992. So ours was right smack dab in the middle, and it was very important for the world that we developed that, because it made life easier for the operators, made the water quality better, regardless of the input quality, and everybody was happy. It was nice. It was a tough industry, still is a tough industry, and it solves some problems. I went on to sell Texas Instruments a lot of stuff, about 2,000 GPM of ultra-pure water for all of their plants around the world. And we had a great career there, and a very successful career, and I'm sure helped the industry along. Now, we wrote a paper which was published in the American Waterworks Journal, and explained everything, which was wonderful because it told the world how to do it. And that was very important in the early days, how to do it right. And TI had been right. And so the world got a good start if they had read that article in the journal, and the journal was interested in publishing it when they heard about it. I thought that was a brand new thing to think about. And it was, and it still is. So that was very important, that our early work and our successive installations proved functionality to produce ultra-pure water. And we did do it everywhere.
Jimmy, tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, when I was in the 4th grade,
Not that far back.
well, it has something to do. It has something to do with it. In the 4th grade, the counselor in elementary school called my parents in and said they called it at that time a learning disability. So they suggested that they start planning that I get into some type of trade, because I was never going to be able to go to college. So it was never expected of me. So I barely graduated high school, and did almost complete a junior college in electromechanical engineering for the space program. But then there was a recession. NASA had their funding cut, so that opportunity ended. So I went to work for my father. He was a general contractor, and quite a gifted one, very sharp in math. He could work with metal, work with wood, quite a scientist. And he was developing a mobile home park for an attorney in St. Louis. And he and the engineer on the project got together and decided the water was really bad, and they had heard about reverse osmosis. So my father purchased, which was considered a fairly large system in its day, produced 72,000 gallons a day, and purchased it from Fluid Systems. And when the equipment was delivered, I was being instructed how to run a pan on a bank, excavating a waste treatment pond, and he brought me over and said, look, you're going to help these guys install this equipment. So that's when I met Randy Truby. And people ask me, well, how long have you been in the business? And I lovingly or jokingly say, I remember Randy when he weighed 185 pounds. So that tells how long I've been in the business. So I wasn't so enamored with the technology, but I was very excited about these young engineers that they sent out on the RO project. And because they were young, they traveled the world, they had a lot of money in their pocket, and they loved to party. So, and I was 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. So the equipment was brand new. Mr. McCormack was working on it in 1969. This was 1971. And it was very new for drinking water, well water applications. And the equipment didn't always work as well as it was designed because the technology was brand new. And the companies that were producing it were mainly from California, long distance away from Florida, so their service wasn't necessarily as good as it could be because of the distance. So we were left there when things would fail. We were had the honor of working with the original engineers and scientists from the process side in helping solve these problems. So we ended up kind of learning the business from a general contracting background, but learning the process from the original engineers and scientists that originated the process. And as time went on, they felt very comfortable with our knowledge, and so they started asking us to install equipment, you know, in different parts of the state of Florida. So we did, and we worked for Permuted, worked for Polymetrics, Fluid Systems, of course. And in 1974, we were asked to provide a price for installing the Key Largo Rock Harbor RO plant, which at the time was the largest RO plant in the world, about 6 months ahead of Jeddah.
It's about 1.4 million gallons a day or something like that?
1 million gallons
1
a
million
day.
gallons a day.
Cellulose acetate membrane, 8-inch, carbon steel vessels. And the feed water is about 7,000 TDS, which is pretty high for that. So we did that installation and met, you know, even more people in the RO industry because it was a high-profile RO plant. I think Ralph Seaton was the president of Fluid Systems at the time, and Claude Gaiman. It was built for the Florida Keys Aqueduct Authority, which we still do work for. And Claude Gaiman was the director at that time. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of exposure to that plant. And I met Iz Newsbaum, Seymour Kremen, and Jack Luce, and Jerry Gentry, Bob Pillay, Pete Darby, all during that period of time, Hob McPherson. And there's many more people and stories that go along with that. Cotton Williams, Irvin Williams, everybody called him Cotton. And so we got a lot of exposure from that plant. And so started working with Iz Newsbaum and about developing a home RO unit to compete against the Continental unit, which was packaging a storage tank, a little building with an RO in it and a pressure pump and all that. And that system didn't work really well in Florida because of the amount of calcium in the water. The DuPont operated at 50% recovery, and it would scale up right away. So we worked with Iz Newsbaum and developed a spiral wound single element unit for the home market. And I left my father's employment and started Harn RO Systems in 1976. And John was my second employee. And I knew John before that, mainly because he had all the women in town.
It's a curse. It's a curse.
That's important.
All the good ones.
That's important.
He was a bachelor. He lived on a sailboat, and so I'll let John, explain a lot of that. So, but prior to starting Harn RO Systems, or as I was starting Harn RO Systems, I was still working for my father, and we're still installing plants. We did one for Permuted in Pelican Bay, which was quite a large plant, and doing other work. And then
was that with DuPont?
No, that was actually with Fluid Systems Elements, and it was an element that Paul Cullors, that owned Basic Technology, came up with. Was a specific element that would treat, would have a lower rejection to remove hardness, but didn't remove a lot of TDS. And it was a cellulose diacetate membrane, so it was a derivative of the cellulose acetate. And so It had a good rejection of hardness and a much lower rejection of sodium and chloride.
Right.
And that was the first, and that
Was
was
the first.
a vision of Paul Cullors,
Yeah.
a smart guy and gifted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So about the time we finished Pelican Bay is when we really started getting going with Harn RO with home units. And John and I spent many a nights out at customer sites working on these things and perfecting it. And so then just Harn RO started gradually building larger and larger units, moving outside of Florida, working around the country, and
You're still doing it.
and still doing it. John worked with me for many years, and John's a Renaissance man. John can do everything,
Yeah.
and it doesn't take, if he doesn't know something, it doesn't take him long to learn it and do it well. So, I said when John left me, it was worse than my first wife leaving me.
Didn't cost you as much.
Well, I don't know. That's the jury's still out on that. I may have been real successful if you had stayed. So anyway, and then we've progressed and
Yep.
and grown with the industry. Learn something new every single day about this technology. You never know it all. As my company has gotten older and I have long-term employees. Most of my employees go back. Vince Clemens, yesterday celebrated his 25th anniversary with us.
Wow.
Chris Myers, my office manager, has been she was
there
my
forever.
first employee.
Yeah, that's right.
And but we recognized that we were getting older, and if the company was going to progress, we needed to get younger people in. So we have a real good staff of young engineers now that have the education, the energy, and the knowledge to take the company to the next level. That that I can't.
John, how about you?
Well,
I mean, what did you do before you met Jimmy? Anything?
no, nothing at all. I blossomed at that time. Obviously, when I got out of high school, went to college, and I had a fancy to be. I was a pre-med major for a while, then I had a conflict with one of the professors, so I switched over to chemistry and graduated in or about 69 or 70. And right at that time, the lottery system had come out for drafting people, and I had a low number, so I was in a position to get drafted the first time they came out with the call for the lower numbers. My number was, I think, 64 or something like that. And I couldn't get work, so when I graduated, so I thought, well, it would be a fun thing to go to Florida and be unemployed in Florida as opposed to being unemployed in Wilmington, Delaware, where my family grew up. My dad was a DuPont guy, an engineer in DuPont, and he was, he thought this was a little unconventional, but anyway, I went to Florida, and as Jimmy mentioned, I had a sailboat, and I had visions of sailing around the world and living a life of a sail bum, and that didn't work. So I sold that and had a restaurant, and that's when I first met Jimmy. He would pop in and have coffee with me every now and then and tell me about some of the things he was doing. And along about that time, a salesman from DuPont, who my dad knew, stopped by to visit me and said, how about coming up and looking at the Venice plant, which was fitted with, at that time, the Permaset permeators. And that was my first introduction into I understood the process, but that was my first introduction into the actual application of reverse osmosis. And after that time, I think the restaurant thing worked for a couple of years, and I sold out. And Jimmy, in the meantime, had said he's thinking about taking off from working for his dad and start up a new company and get involved in initially installing equipment for Permuted and some of the other people that were doing business in Florida at the time. Everything was coming from California, and we were in Florida. We were in a good spot. And so that kept us busy, and we got into the residential stuff, building the residential RO units for homes that were on the barrier islands where they had saltwater intrusion, and it was about their only option. So that worked out well. It was kind of an interesting thing. We had a lot of development things that we had to deal with. I remember the first system we put in made so much noise it kept everybody awake in the neighborhood. We had a positive displacement pump, and it rattled and made a lot of noise. So we were engineering and experimenting on our customers along the way. But we came up with a fairly bulletproof design for a residential clientele, and then we got involved in like Jimmy mentioned earlier. Some of the systems manufacturers would utilize our services for installing their equipment, and we started looking at it and saying, hey, this might be something we can go ahead and do ourselves. So we got involved with, at that time, hollow fiber membranes were seemed to be the way to go. So we had developed a relationship with Toyobo, and we couldn't get a license to do business with to sell Permaset products. So this was a way to get into the marketplace, and then we saw the light that perhaps spiral wound technology was going to rule the day eventually. So we had quite a good run in going around and replacing all the hollow fiber plants in Florida that were already established. And we learned a lot from other people's designs. We learned from the good things that they did, and we also learned from some of the mistakes. As we all know, feed waters are unique. Florida has some unique aspects about the raw water has a lot of hydrogen sulfide, and a lot of people weren't treating hydrogen sulfide properly, and we understood the difficulties and how to handle the hydrogen sulfide in the raw water. And one thing led to another. We started building bigger and bigger plants, and it started to it was fun. We enjoyed it. We didn't do things without making some mistakes, but we were quick to correct the mistakes, hopefully before the owners of the equipment found out about it, and maintained a fairly good reputation for the most part of the. And this was, I think, to put it chronologically, 1980 to 1996 or something like that. While I was with Jim Harn, learned a lot, and I am today what I am because of Jim Harn and some of the things that he was able to teach me. I think we worked together on some of the technical aspects I could help out with, and mechanical things Jim helped out with. So we got a fairly well-rounded group of people. Hired in some other people that were good mechanically, and it was a good run. Made some nice equipment. A lot of stuff is still alive and well and producing permeate.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was because of hydrogen sulfide that I first met you two guys. You remember that?
Was that the job in the swamp?
This was Spanish Lakes.
Oh yes, yeah.
They had a problem, as I recall, with the wells, and Tom Missimer had been in there to try and help the guy out. I forget his name, the manager there, but Tom.
Orville Ives. Oh, he's the operator.
Yeah, this was the park manager. But he had a polymetrics unit, I think with 3 B9s, and he'd managed to somehow oxidize the feed water, and all 3 of them were plugged with sulfur. And while I was there one day, this little truck turns up with Harn RO, I think hand-lettered, on the door, and these 2 guys get out wearing singlets, and in those days you had big hair. And,
Yeah, Jimmy had an afro.
and this was Harn RO Systems. It's a day that will live in infamy.
Yeah, the letters were, I think, written on with chalk so we could wipe them off quickly.
Austin, I don't know if you remember or not, but you were my first client when I
Really?
started
Wow.
Rostec Services in 1983.
Wow.
You hired me, and I don't know how you heard of me, but you hired me to come down to Texas and to go to Granbury with you because they were getting ready to buy an electrodialysis plant from Sandy Boxleitner. And you wanted me to stand up and extol the virtues of RO, which I did, but they bought the Ionics plant anyway.
Right.
But you were my number 1 client.
How about that?
I'll never forget that. You took me to a barbecue place for dinner the night that I arrived, which was a famous, I think that's where they shot the Urban Cowboy.
Was it Spring Creek?
It's Gillies. Gillies. where they had the bull in the middle and you rode the bull. I'll never forget that.
So how'd
the
that
bull?
go?
The
Yeah,
bull?
had the riding bull. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'll never forget
Okay.
that. So when did you actually start your Austin McCormack?
1964.
1964.
Yeah.
And you operated it for a long time, and finally,
Till 92.
and then you sold out, right? You sold it to ARI, was it ARI?
Yes, that's correct.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
And then they sold it out to the same company that now owns the German guys.
Siemens. Yeah.
They scooped up all of the excessive bidders. This is a tough business, I'm telling you. We all deserve to be patted on the back because of being successful in a tough business.
Yeah, it was a tough business.
Right.
Tough business. You had a couple of people that worked for you that I have worked with since. Do you remember Ken Panja?
Sure. Ken Pandya
Yeah.
was my choice for my replacement when I sold the company.
Yeah. And John Dietrich?
John is so smart a guy.
Yeah.
And he was here. I met him.
That's right. That's right. He and I worked together quite a lot, even today. So.
John did something unusual. We built a $500,000 vacuum deaerator at one time in our career. And to spend $500,000 for a vacuum deaerator is absurd. I mean, it's still there. It's still in operation. And it's on a side hill, and it's a vessel, long, skinny white vessel. It's about 60 foot high, maybe 7 foot diameter. And it's still there. And it's deaerating seawater to 0.005 parts per million of oxygen. So it's very valuable to a nuclear reactor that it sits near. And John was the designer of that. I designed a lot of vacuum deaerators. But when John came along, he was smarter than I was. So he designed the bigger ones.
So, Austin, where was this vacuum deaerator installed?
Diablo Canyon.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's still there. And I've
Still there. It'll be there forever because it protects all of the tubing inside the nuclear reactor. So it has to operate. It
now,
must operate.
did you supply all of the equipment for that?
No, that was done by Ionics.
So this was
and I
Ionics.
had a joint bid.
Right.
I bid
right.
the vacuum deaerator, and they bid all of the equipment, which I think their equipment is now out of there, but I don't know what happened to that.
Well, they work on a contract basis, because when I worked for Hydronautics had installed a seawater RO system to provide process water, and then Ionics got the contract to provide the boiler feed water,
Yes,
and your vacuum deaerator was part of that
I was
system.
part of their bid.
Right,
Yeah, they didn't understand vacuum deaerators at all,
Right.
and I did, and John did especially. Buying the vacuum pumps for that job was a tough task
I bet.
because we were dealing in an area where they were not familiar, and we had to guide them through to the right kind of pumps. And we did, obviously.
Ionics used, at least initially, DuPont's spiral wound membrane in that
I think that's right.
and it didn't work that well. So Jimmy, when you started, you built small plants initially,
Mm-hmm.
but you soon moved on to build some pretty big plants.
Mhm.
And you and I have worked together on a couple of projects.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about the competitive environment in Florida, say in the
Yeah,
80s and
wow.
90s.
Well, it was very competitive, and we had some very credible competition. I remember probably our big break was a project that we were bidding against Hydronautics, and Hydronautics not only being a membrane manufacturer but also was a systems manufacturer, And they were very difficult to beat because not only did they build really good equipment and provide a really good service, but they were also cheap.
That's
Inexpensive,
impossible.
Jimmy.
Inexpensive.
Inexpensive.
Okay, you're right, inexpensive. And so our first big break was a project right near us for Boca Grande Island. It was called Gasparilla Island Water Association. And we were bidding that job. It was two 250,000 gallon day systems, high TDS, 4 to 5,000 TDS. And Bennett and Bishop was the engineers on that project, which my dad had worked with on conventional plants and pipelines for a lot of years, and I had worked and knew the outfit as well. So we prepared our bid, and Al Flores was representing Hydronautics, and if anybody knew Al Flores, his proposals would make the best competition's proposals look terrible. Al's proposals were meticulous, comprehensive, and Al was very focused, you know, an A-type personality. So we bid the project, and we were the low bid, and he just couldn't believe that we had beat him. And we came very, very close to backing out of that project because there was a question on the sales tax, whether it should have been included, and we hadn't included the sales tax, but you know, we felt the language and the specifications were clear about that. And Bill Bishop, which owned the firm, Mr. Bennett had left the firm by that time, agreed with us that, yeah, the sales tax should have been added, yet the engineer that was in charge of the project insisted, you know, no, you needed to include it. So we almost backed out of the project for the sales tax issue, but we decided to take it. And it was a good thing. We made a fair profit, and that's still our customer today. We're in a process. We later expanded it to 1 million gallons a day. We've incorporated some new technology. We have always designed our plants so conservatively that we've always been able to upgrade them with current technology very inexpensively. So we're in a process of upgrading 3 of the 4 trains now. And so that was a really turning point in our organization. And one of the challenges we faced, we were young, and most of the company, and a very small company, but most of our competitors were very large, well-recognized companies with a lot of money, or a lot of backing anyway. And we always struggled with engineers and owners thinking we were credible in this business because we were very young. One of the things but we were also very inventive. We brought 2-pass RO technology to this country 2 years before anybody else had it. We brought it from Japan. And yet, 2-pass RO. We were to take the permeate and feed the second system with permeate to, you know, to polish it. And, but the only company that actually embraced us on the technology was Pfizer Pharmaceutical, which bought a system from us. And I think the only reason they did that is that in earlier years we had worked with Pfizer in helping develop polyacrylate scale inhibitors. There was 2 companies at the time that were doing research on that. One was CSI, Nita Kaploff, which B.F. Goodrich later bought her company, and Pfizer. And we went with Pfizer because they gave us full guarantees that if anything happened bad with their scale inhibitor, which, you know, everybody recognizes how important scale inhibitors are to an RO plant, that they would, you know, back up and replace any damage. And CSI kept saying, well, no, don't worry, you know, trust us, it'll work, you know. And so after about 2 years of testing, we found that the polyacrylates worked far superior to sodium hexametaphosphate. Sodium X had a lot of inherent problems. In the Florida heat, it would hydrolyze within a day or so, and you'd be just injecting water, a lot of waste to it.
Do you remember that incident that actually converted all the plants from sodium hex to polyacrylate? You remember that?
Yeah,
It was like 6 or 7.
That was the brown bag hexametaphosphate.
That was the brown bag
Right,
hexamet,
yeah.
like
City
6 or
of
7
Yeah.
plants.
Yeah,
That-
had
that's
iron
right.
in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Cape Coral was one,
Yeah.
and
City
Sanibel
of
was
Venice was
one,
one, yeah.
City of Venice was one. It was like overnight,
Yeah.
everybody quit using hex and started using polyacrylate.
sodium hexametaphosphate was used for quite a long time for in attempts to sequester calcium carbonate in higher recovery systems, and there was inherent problems with heat. It was the effectiveness of it would deteriorate significantly if you were pumping from a day tank. And Jimmy failed to mention we did some work with Pfizer on their polyacrylates, and we also after we did that, we sort of got a little sideline job supplying antiscalants to the reverse osmosis marketplace within the sphere of influence that we had, which at that time was essentially just Florida. And lo and behold, after that, B.F. Goodrich came and approached us and said, can we do some studies as well to get some efficacy information on to be able to demonstrate efficacy. And Florida is a unique place because it has a good raw water source to demonstrate things like the ability of the antiscalants to disrupt the crystallization and run these plants safely at higher recoveries. And so it was kind of an interesting period. You're quite right. It was, my memory's not that good, but I get the impression there was like a boxcar of sodium hex that rolled into Florida, got distributed to all the RO plants, and there was they had an impurity of iron in it, caused some great difficulty, and it was a good way to step into the marketing of polymeric
And as I
antiscalants.
recall, there were 6 or 7 plants, and that's
Yeah,
some pretty good
yeah,
sized plants
yeah.
involved, and they all failed at about the same time.
Yeah, it was a
It's like
catastrophic
within the same
failure.
week.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
They all failed the same week. Wow.
yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing.
And I think some of the spiral plants were able to clean, but the hollow fiber ones,
They were dead.
They were dead
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, Austin, you the company that you started is best known for
McCormack Corporation.
Yeah, McCormack Corporation is best known for, I think, it's true to say, is best known for its work on the industrial side.
Yes.
Did you do much municipal work at all?
I think we were mostly industrial. We had a big job finally at General Electric in Florida, which was quite complicated because of the automation requirement. But it was a large contract, and I could only get it after having sold my company to somebody who could bond an $8 million job. I couldn't bond an $8 million job. Maybe $3 million is the biggest job we had done prior to that. And by selling out to this guy, he had to sign all this rotten papers on he's going to go, his wife's going to lose all her money, he's going to lose all his money. It's really a terrible procedure they go through on bonding. But he signed all the documents, like we got the contract, and I made him as much money in that as he paid me for my company. So he was very happy. And I was very happy to be able to do that. But it was a really very successful job. This is General Electric in Florida. They shut down. They made these cruise missiles for the U.S. government.
You remember where that was?
Tampa, Florida.
Tampa, thank you. I think that facility is on Hillsborough Avenue, right across from Safety Harbor.
I don't remember it, do you?
You remember it? Maybe it's a bit further west.
Cruise missiles were sold to the government, sold to users for $1 million each, so
Yeah,
they were quite complicated.
yeah.
And the specifications were quite complicated. And we bid the thing, and we were adjudged to be the low bidder. And we had excellent engineers working on the project, and it all worked fine. Went into operation without any hitches. Wow, nothing I expected. But it did, and we did, and they did. Everything was great.
Good.
And my boss thought it was lovely.
Jimmy, it's over the years, you and I have both seen companies come and go in Florida. It's kind of like that TV show that's on there, Last Man Standing.
Right.
You know, we just lost another one of your erstwhile competitors with HydroPro.
Right.
They're gone, hopefully for good now.
Right.
And you've been able to survive. How have you, I mean, apart from astute business acumen, how have you been able to do that?
Well, yeah, we've seen a lot of companies come and go, and many times a company go out of business, and then two companies spring up. It's like a snake with two heads sometimes. Spring up, and so we have to deal with that too, but generally they don't last very long either. We've always been extremely customer orientated and provide excellent service, and we've always tried to charge a fair profit. And we've seen companies that want to get their foot in the door of the industry, and they'll go in and buy a job, do it for less than cost, or do it at cost, or try to do it at cost, thinking they can make up the money at a later time. And I think I've seen more companies go out of business because of that philosophy, because you never make it up. And the other situation with that is that they load themselves up. We might have a slow year, and they load themselves up with a lot of non-profitable work just to keep busy. And we've never done that. I would rather have our people sweep the floors and do maintenance than I would to lose money on a job. And inevitably what happens is our competition gets tied up with non-profitable work, and then good jobs come along that you can make a good profit, and we have the capacity to do it. We just step in and take the jobs, and they don't have the capacity. So we've always made a fair profit. We've of course had lean years. And I have to say the people that have worked with us in our organization have worked really hard, that anything they put out for the company has their name on it. And it's really high quality equipment. It has low O&M costs, relatively no failures or breakdowns. We've never had a bad job or an unhappy customer. We have 100% satisfied customers. Wow. And one thing that I'm really proud of is that we've never been, in almost 40 years of business now, we've never been in any litigation with anybody for any reason.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Zero.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive.
And we're still, doing well.
Well, you started Harn RO about the same time as Paul Culler started Basic Technologies.
Well, he was actually before us.
He was before you?
Before us. In fact, I did one project for him. And we had a falling out over that. It was Punta Gorda Isles Utilities on Burn Store Road. And Paul Cullers and his organization should have owned the membrane treatment industry, because they had the engineers, and a lot of them Permuted, ex-Permuted, which were the best in the world. They had the technology. They were the first. They built that's where we got the fiberglass frames from, because they did we do it a lot differently than they did, but still they used fiberglass.
Well, I'd like to interject that I was responsible for building the fiberglass, knowing not much about it. And Jimmy always said that's not as good as Basic Tech does, so we got to do it again. So we learned, and like Jimmy said, adopted different techniques that maybe it was an improvement, and made it a little better. But they were I guess a benchmark, somebody to shoot for.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, they started with the pillar block things, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the permeators.
Right.
Yeah.
And tried to adopt
What
that.
happened to Paul Culler's company?
It went bankrupt. They started trying to do jobs in Saudi Arabia, I believe is what it was. And Paul is a gifted visionary, but he's not a good businessman, in my opinion. And if he would have left the business to others and been the visionary that he was, they would have been the most successful company, I think.
And they spent a lot of money on what I guess you'd call business development, but it was really, for most of us, it was the excuse to have a good party at the conferences.
That doesn't sound.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well,
There's nothing wrong with that.
the falling out we had was that, even back then, this is in the late 70s, they had a reputation not paying their bills. And so when we did the project, I filed a notice of intent with Punta Gorda Isles to lien the project if we didn't get paid. And Punta Gorda Isles had $1 million bond out so they could continue construction with, it was Department of Natural Resources then. And so the project had to be finished and closed out before they could get their bond back. And we weren't getting paid, and we kept getting a lot of excuses why not. And we were done. I was working down there 24 hours a day to get it in by the date this bond was would have been confiscated or so forth. And so we ended up finally getting paid, and then I signed a final release. And Paul was really upset at us for that, but we did get paid.
Good, good. Jimmy, you built a lot of plants in Florida and elsewhere. Is there one that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, there is. I mean, there are a lot of really good plants and with special situations, but I think the one that sticks out in my mind the most for being the most challenged ever, and John and I worked on this one, was that there was a plume in California that from over pumping brought salt water in, and the engineer was Dick Sudak, SPI, and they identified a plume and wanted to put an RO system on it to treat this water. And then they were going to, it was meant to be semi-portable. They were going to move it to another location in 3 years. Well, that was probably 15, 18 years ago, and it's still there treating this plume. But first of all, anybody that has ever worked with Dick Sudak knows how tough Dick Sudak. He was fair, but he was extremely tough. His specifications were the most comprehensive specifications that anybody, I think, has ever written. Very demanding. It was one of the first jobs where VFDs were being applied to large pumps. And our first challenge was that these were 150 horsepower Gould's pumps. And before we could get the pumps up to full speeds, they were exceeding their amp rating. So we had like a tourist station wagon. Well, actually, even before this, we had hired a general contractor to do the installation. And soon after we hired him, we realized he was over his head. So John and I had to fly out to California before the slab was poured at the last minute and actually install all the electrical conduit ourselves.
Yeah, I think I remember digging footers or digging ditches and stuff.
And bending conduit and stuff like that just so they could pour the floor. So I had a little tourist station wagon, and we had this 150 horsepower high pressure pump in the back of the station wagon. We're going down to City of Industry with a car dragging the back end with this pump so Gould's could test it.
This was before lowriders. You know?
Right. We had a high rider in the front and a low rider in the back. So that was one. I think we finally got that straightened out. And what had happened was motors had not caught up with the amount of windings they needed for VFDs. There wasn't enough copper in the motor. So we got that solved. And then the last thing, we were in startup and running. I'd been out there a month because we had a problem that we could not solve. And I was out there by myself. I had been out there a month away from my family. It was a rainy, cold, nasty day on a Sunday, and I'm still in the plant trying to figure this out. And I remember calling home and talking to the family and sitting outside the building where it was quiet, or quieter, underneath a little overhang and the rain just coming down, sitting there and ending the call and saying, what do I do now? I'm at my wit's end. We can't solve this problem. And we ended up finally solving it. And Dick Sudak was extremely happy. I think we were the only OEM that he liked. And we had, after that project, we had routine phone calls from him asking us questions about different things. And so it was an extremely difficult, challenging project for a very challenging engineer. that things didn't go right at first, but we worked through it. We never gave up. John and I were actually out there physically doing work ourselves to make sure it went well. And Dick Sudak was very happy, and it's still in and running well. So I'd have to think that project was the most, I guess, challenging and rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember a different project, John?
Well, they're all had their unique aspects and challenges. No project ever went smooth, but I do recall, and you mentioned earlier how Jimmy survived all these years, and I just recall some of the social things that happened in installations, and we would go to some of these out of the way places, not backwater, but out of the way places, small municipalities that didn't know anything about the reverse osmosis process, but they had gotten some state funding to put in these processes, and it was invariably we ended up meeting some of the local people. We put one in an old fire station, but the floors were uneven, and we had to shim everything up and get things going. And at the end of the day, we're having a couple of beers with the mayor, and I thought I said this is kind of a
cool.
fun job
Yeah.
to have, where you make people happy. You're making a good contribution to the community. You give them a good product, and they're appreciative of it, and you get to rub elbows with the politicos, which
Yeah, I
I
remember
thought was kind of great.
we did a job at hydronautics in a little town in Colorado, and when we started the plant up, and I wasn't there for the startup, but one of the, I think it was Paul Laverty was there. He said that these little old ladies would come up to him and thank him for making water, so now they could cook their beans properly.
Well, we actually had, in this one place I'm thinking about, we were working, and I think maybe we had 3 or 4 people up there at the time, and some of the wives of some of the city the management people showed up with crock pots full of food and stuff, and fed us right there on the job site to keep us working. I think they had some. That was a
That's
motivation.
what it was,
to keep us on the job.
Keep you on the job. Yeah.
But it's kind of, that makes it a little, the money's good and all that kind of stuff, and it's good to have a successful project.
Yeah.
But I think it's great to see that the people appreciate it.
Have an
as well.
impact.
Yeah.
That's
And
important.
we still see those people. We still see those people on a regular basis, because our philosophy, the easiest customer is the one you already have. The hardest customer and the most expensive is the one you're trying to get. And so we service everything that we've ever sold, and we're still in contact with people we built systems for in the late 70s.
Oh yeah.
They don't call us often.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
But
The ones that are still alive.
well, the ones that are still alive or not retired, which you know.
Yeah.
That's very
Well, I could go on with this for a long time, but we've reached the end of our allotted time, and I would like to thank you all for coming. Austin, it's tremendous to see you again after all these years. And
Yes,
Jimmy,
pleasure meeting you, and you've done so well. Do you want a job?
I'm really excited by this convention.
oh yeah.
Really amazing. I love to be here. It would, yes.
Well, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.